In this episode, we're going to take you through the professional due diligence process, and we're going to explore what is involved in a thorough property evaluation and what red flags should you be looking for, what's discoverable and yet not discovered by most property buyers, and why is it the new buyers agents don't know how to do due diligence.
Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent and buyer's agent mentor, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, author of Auction Ready and co-host of Your First Home Buyer Guide.
Hi, I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker, currently ranked number 3 in the MPA Top 100 Mortgage Broker Awards. Before we get started, everything we talk about today is not personal advice, and we recommend you engage the services of a licensed and experienced professional.
Today, we're going to take you on a whirlwind tour through the 109 points on my property due diligence checklist. Yes, you heard me right, 109 points at last count. And I can tell you, as someone who never stops learning, that I have no problems with adding to this list whenever either I or somebody else in my team discovers something else we could be checking. All right, so Chris has asked me today to run through this entire list with you. We're not going to go literally through 109 checkpoints, but we are going to talk through the process that we use in my business to make sure that we're uncovering what can be uncovered prior to a client moving forward with the purchase.
Look, I don't mean to pump your tyres here, to be honest, but it is extremely thorough. And I do love that about you, is that you always are looking to, improve, and you got a process, and, there's so much detail behind what you do and thought behind it. And there's so many things there's so many things I'm just reading through this. I've never thought of that, never thought of that. I mean, how do you want to attack it, I guess? Because there's so many now. It's going to take us about 4 days to go through them point by point. But I think a good way to think about it, let's just go for this first one. The property inspection, I mean, how do you even think about that? A lot of people just go when the agent's got the viewing, and they go with a partner. They're trying to go viewing to viewing. So they're trying to fit 4 viewings in or 10 viewings in on the day. They're already, how they're feeling on that day and how happy they are and what they've seen. So how do you go in there, I guess, much more level-headed and rational, and how do you approach a property inspection?
Well, a couple of things. I go through so many properties and have done so for so many years now. I've now been in property for 25 years, right? Selling or buying it. And that means professionally, not just doing it for myself. So I have an extraordinarily good radar for when I walk through a property just for noticing stuff. When we go through, and my team, because my team all is as experienced as I am, huge depth of experience. So for us, that bit's actually relatively easy. We don't get distracted by the time of day, by the there are crowds, there aren't crowds, the agent controlling how long we've got. We don't get distracted by that. Our little antennas are going off all the time. And in fact, we record little videos as we go through properties for clients, which has got like a stream of consciousness. So just as we notice things, we point it out and, oh, look at that. There's a crack there. I wonder what that is. Or there's a mark there. I reckon that's a leaking. I'm going to get outside. I'm going to have a look at the roof. And obviously we're not building inspectors, but we do notice things. We notice things like smells. We notice things like how low the ceilings are. We notice things like dodgy DIY renovations. We notice things like the levels of the floor. We notice things like, the roof lines that there's various additions have been put on over the years. There's just so many things. We notice drainage. We notice fencing. We notice what's over the fence. We notice there's just so much that our little beady little eyes and our senses are just twitching when we walk through a property. And so that's the very first step, is really to make sure that we give it a good once-over. Even in limited time, we are utilising the video as well to make sure we're just doing things and checking things out and noting that or recording that we've noted things. And you know what? Sometimes there's just an immediate deal breaker. We're not even going to get into evaluating this property, because for more properties than we evaluate, less properties, a small proportion of properties we inspect, put it that way. So it's step one. It's a very important part of the evaluation process. It will determine whether we go for it or not. But what we uncover there and what we show the clients is very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through that experience as well before where, I'm looking at the view, I'm looking how nice it looked to change this wall and put a kitchen in here. And then, the buyer's agent saying, on it, so, there's massive damp issues and
You missed that.
downstairs. I'm like, well, I'm not even
Yeah.
going down there. Like, that's a weird staircase. And I've even picked up that it's a weird staircase down there. You know what I mean? And that's is it even safe? Is it legal?
Yeah. Is it
And
legal?
so I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think you're looking at all the things, probably and negatives,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're absolutely, taking note of the positives and they're great, but it's the negatives, or the things that could be a concern or deal breakers. And are you that ruthless? A deal breaker is truly a deal breaker. And, as much as the client loves it, it's time to move on. Privacy is massively compromised here, or, the road, but you probably should have known that at the start. But I mean, what are the major deal
depends.
breakers?
Look, it depends. Obviously, if we're driving a search, we're not going to look at properties on main roads.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sometimes clients bring properties to us and we have to go grudgingly look at them. We did look at, like, for example, we looked at a property recently and it was a double-fronted freestanding weatherboard. It was on a nice level block. It was in a, fairly nice street. This is a property that we know is transacted a few times over the last 20 years. And we know the property has never been renovated. It's never changed. It's never been renovated. It's undersized for the area. It's like begging to be turned into a family home. And when we were there, it was swarming with buyer's agents. And I was sort of observing the conversations that these buyer's agents were having with their clients, and they weren't having the same conversations we had with our client. Our conversation was, you know what, there's a good reason why this has transacted a number of times over the last 20 years and has not been renovated, has not been extended, nothing's been done. And fundamentally, it was too low to the ground and it's sort of too modest at the front. There's massive compromises. You're in a conservation area, but you sort of need to demolish it. So you could sort of see why the costs would just ramp up and why nobody's done it. And I'm wondering how many of those conversations we've had. But that's the sort of thing that we look to. We look to what is stopping this being an A grade. If it's not A grade now, what's stopping it? Can you fix that? And so there's a lot that we can uncover. And our due diligence process really, really does start at that point. And we might have still gone for it if it was the right client and they were looking for a big renovation project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we would have gone through some of our other due diligence points because then we would need to check for the potential for that property. But another thing that we do sort of at the inspection point, but it's something that we do quantify when we get a little bit further down our due diligence process, and that is we give it an assessment of its asset caliber. We do score every property that we go for. And so we've got a set of criteria that we do score, and we're looking for a minimum score out of 100, so it gets a mark. And if it comes out with 75 or more, we think, okay, well, that's got really good possibilities to being, an overperformer in this area. And so that gives us a bit of a green light. If it doesn't score that high, we've got to look at it. Why? Is that something that really should be a deal breaker, or is it something that can be fixed, or is it something we just have to accept, or the client will just have to accept? But we've got a motto in our business, which is eyes wide open. So whenever there's something that could be an amber or a red flag, we want to make sure we're discussing it with that client and they know about that very early on.
So, yeah, obviously seeing it more than once as well. I mean, do you make sure the clients see it at least more than once, or is it a bit hit and miss sometimes with their timeframes? And
look, usually if they're owner-occupied, they're going to want to see it more than once, and 2 or 3 times is great. If they're an investor, they might not see it at all. Sometimes if they're remote, they might not see it even as an owner-occupier. We will see it at least twice. So, and often in my team, 2 of us might go and have a look, particularly if there's any questions about that. So we do collaborate internally. We do talk about all properties that we inspect for clients, and we do evaluate for clients. And so on that second visit, even though we pick up so much on the first visit, we're looking for other things. And one of the things that we're looking for example, particularly on the second visit, is there something that could change that we need to be looking for in our further due diligence process that might impact the livability of the property or the value of that property adversely. So it could be, is there a view that potentially could be lost, or is there a property next door that's not yet gone second story, but you can see potentially has on a potential for that, or is there a development site across the road or is the zoning change, or we're looking for evidence or for signs that there might be something else that we need to be checking, and also the neighbourhood. We might then have a bit of a better look at the neighbourhood as well, if we're not particularly familiar with it. So there's always more to have a look at there. And we do, again, part of our process is Simone in my team does our due diligence, a lot of the due diligence we do for clients, and we have a little process in there to flag with her things to dig into, if we need to make extra investigations on anything.
So, that's probably step one. Now, inspections, multiple inspections, looking for things that are probably negatives on the property, obviously understanding the suburb, and I guess highlighting the deal breakers and how good the asset is really, and how much does it fit the buyer brief, I guess, is probably the other part. And
yeah, there is that as well.
are you even thinking about price yet? Or is it now just a case of, okay, it could be a good asset, but you probably know whether it's in the ballpark of their budget. You probably don't know what you're willing to pay, but you're probably thinking it must be in that range. Otherwise, you probably would have ruled it out anyway. Is it next step just looking at, requesting the contract and looking at the documents, because you've already jumped through, you made a decision whether at least you want to go for it or not, or consider it, is at least at that first step, right?
Yeah, so when in New South Wales, there's a lot of vendor disclosure documents that come in a contract to sale. And in Victoria, for example, there's a contract to sale and a separate document, which is called a Section 32. In Queensland, there's been new legislation, and at some point there's going to be vendor disclosure. WA, you get bugger all, and Tassie, you get bugger all. South Australia, you get some documents. Northern Territory, can't remember. But so in all different states and territories, you get some information from the vendor or via the agent, right? So we get quite a lot in New South Wales. So when we've got all of that stuff at hand, we know what to look for in those documents that will give us a sense of, do we have problems here? So we are looking at the information that is in that contract, and we're looking at, and I'll just give you one example, there's plenty, it could be as simple as in the deposited plan, we look for that land size. It could be that the agents advertise it at 600 square metres and we look at it, it's actually only 534. Right. It could be like that. It could be that we're looking at easements. We're thinking, oh, God, it's got this terrible drainage easement that looks like a bit of a nightmare, needs investigation, or is a total deal breaker. It could be the sewer runs under the house. There's no documentation from Sydney Water that was in case when the house was built. Well, there's a lot in that. And also if it's a strata property, there's additional documents there as well that we want to go through. And so it's knowing, A, what documents are provided, and B, what information is in those documents, and how to actually look at those documents to get that information so we can advise our client, okay, let's continue looking at this property, or should we shelve it?
Yeah, and I guess that's where you're sort of trying to figure out whether the terms of the contract suit the vendor and the buyer, or what are some other things there that really catch people out in terms of, is it documents that they haven't got that they need to find? Is it, because a lot of them is, you've got some disclosure documents, right? But there's a lot of other things that people need to go and investigate at this point. Do you find?
Yeah. And in fact, if you're in other states, you don't even get half of that information. Yeah. So you've actually got to be thinking, okay, what could we know that we don't know? What searches could the lawyer do, for example, before we go to auction or before we make an unconditional offer? So that's something that, everybody needs to understand in their state or territory. And it's also why it's really important to have a really good lawyer who understands property as well and knows what the risks are prior to you committing. In other states, for example, like say in Queensland, you can put forward conditional offers, although when the market's hot, it's really hard to do. But, and those conditions need to cover you off so that you've got time to check the sorts of things that we get handed to us in New South Wales and Victoria. But one of the things that you would think would be in a contract, which isn't, often isn't, sometimes is, but it's not a prescribed document, and that is anything relating to a renovation that's been done. So that's something that we know can be particularly problematic. And one of the things with due diligence that is so important is that in a hot market, buyers, they're not picky, right? They will forego a lot of the
Yeah.
searches, a lot of the sticking points that might actually stop a deal going through, or a lawyer might advise them, don't go ahead on that property in a slow market, and it might really make a property quite difficult to sell. In a hot market, everyone, their eyes glaze over, they pin their ears back and they're like, FOMO, I don't care, I'm just going to take the risk, right? What we want to do is make sure that even in a hot market, our clients are fully aware of what those risks are. So there's none of these hot market blindness, and this is one area in particular around approvals that is the sort of thing that people gloss over in a hot market, but in a slow market can absolutely undo a sale of a property. And so you, as an owner, when you buy a property, you don't want to get stuck with something that the previous owner didn't bother getting all their approvals on. When they're the ones that did the work. They know who the plumber was. They know who the builder was. They know who the certifier was, And so when we're actually buying a property that's been renovated, we want to get our grubby little hands on all those documents, because we know that once that vendor is gone, if they have forgotten where they are, I can't tell you the amount of times people have lost documentation around, the renovation of a property. So these are things that really you need to be aware of what's missing, what documents could be given to you if you ask for them, asking for them, and then checking them against what's been approved. So you look at the property and think, okay, well, now I know, now I found out what's been approved. Is what was built, does it match? So all of these things really do count, because sometimes council can actually come in and make good.
And is it really where people have modified the dwelling instead of balconies or, decks or changing windows or, is it these the ones that people really need to be worried about rather than, say, small internal renos? Is that where, I guess, where people majorly step up?
It can be where they've added rooms. Like one house that we didn't end up buying this, a client really, really loved this house, right? And downstairs, when they did the renovation, they got a bit carried away with the digger, and they dug more space, right? So they had these extra rooms down there that were not approved, and council made them brick up the room. So, they were selling it. They had a bed in one of them. They were selling this, right? And we're like, it's not a bedroom, and they're marketing it as a bedroom. They're trying to say that it wasn't even a space, because actually what the council did, they came in, made them brick it up with Besser bricks, like blocked the whole thing up, and it turned from a big room into a cupboard.
Right.
So an example like that, imagine if you buy a house, you think, oh, even if I don't put a bed in it, I'm going to put my home gym down there or something like that. And almost like you don't have the space anymore, but you paid for it. So things like that. There's lots of little funny little things that you'll see the more properties you look at.
So you've gone through, you've decided whether the property is good or not, whether they're all the documents are fine, you've checked that everything's there. I mean, you probably haven't gone through it with a fine-tooth comb yet, but you've at least sort of made sure everything's there. You've got all the documents you need. It's nothing. There's been no major smoke that you need to really sort of investigate. Renos all look fine. Is it then a conversation to the client saying, look, this one could be really worth considering, but we still need to go through some more processes here? Is it getting that client commitment?
Yeah, we have to at that point, because the thing is that the client, we wouldn't have even done that if the client doesn't like the property, but the client likes the property, right? So it's like, okay, we've done our top level due diligence. This is the stuff that's immediately discoverable without going and making big inquiries. So we know that we've covered off from any obvious red flags. And so now it's looking good, but we've still got more work to do. And we need the client to have some buy-in at this point, because the client's now going to start spending some additional money. They're paying us, of course, but they're going to be paying for a building and pest inspection, or they're going to pay for a contract review with the lawyer, maybe a pool inspection, maybe any other of those sort of inspections that are required, strata report. So now's the time that their investment in further money is going to be required at some point in the near future. And so we want to make sure that they understand what's coming and why, and they give us their approval at this point of time, so that then we move into the next gear, really, which is when we really dial it up. And there's quite a lot there. We also want to check with the broker at this point of time as well. It's very important that, I mean, you'll love this, that I'm sure you've got people that come to you and they've got an auction tomorrow. Chris, want to make sure my finance is fine. Well, we want to get in a little bit earlier than that. We want to make sure that there's nothing changed around their financing. We want to test the broker on this particular property because, maybe it's in like a strata, for example, might be in a building that the lender doesn't want to lend in. I mean, there's could be limited title. There could be all these reasons why the lending could get unstuck. So we want to check that. So that's not typically a property due diligence, if you like, but it's a client due diligence in terms of making sure that they are in a position to move forward on this property and whether this property would fit the criteria of their lender.
Oh, I mean, you're probably the only one I know that does that. If in
Really?
fairness,
God.
yeah, we work with lots of buyers agents, and I mean, I guess I don't know whether, but if they don't do it with us. I don't think they would do that with other brokers, right? Even if we've referred them to them or, we've got a client mutually, it is one of those rare things I think that you do is just making sure that the finance is ready to go and they're ready to go unconditional. Because, yeah, you're right. A lot of people don't know what they're doing and they do think they've got pre-approvals. And so I do think that's a really good step that you're doing is because, a lot of buyers think they've got pre-approval and they haven't. So that's an interesting one. So the client's committed. You think they can get, the finance all looks fine. Everything looks good. Is it the legal side now and you're going deep into the detail, into the documents and particularly on apartments? I imagine you're going really deep here. And I imagine you go a lot further than a lot of other buyers agents here, to be honest.
There's not many that do what we do. I can honestly say that. Look, at this point, also, we want to check, something that we've been doing recently with our interviews on climate change and the impact to insurance costs. Now, and something we've added in recently, is that we get the client to contact their current house insurer or one of their choice and get an insurance estimate for the property. Unless it's strata, of course, they don't have to worry about it if there's strata, but there will be information on that coming up in the strata report. But that's just something to check too, because again, it might be like, oh my God, I'm not going to pay $20,000 a year in house insurance or whatever, that could be a deal breaker, so that's something also to check. But when we send it to a solicitor, the contract, sometimes we've identified things we specifically want the solicitor to check on. These are things that we need legal advice on, and we will highlight that and bring that to the solicitor's attention so that we're making sure that we're covering off on things that we've noticed that, oh, hang on, we're not sure about that. And obviously what happens before you go to auction or before you make an offer is that there's rarely a contract that they don't request at least one change. And certainly if you're not in New South Wales and you're making conditional offers, you want to make sure that those conditions are written correctly. And so that's why it's so important to engage a lawyer at the right time. And so for us, this is the right time. For someone buying themselves, you'd want to actually get a lawyer involved earlier because remember, we've gone through the contract already. We've highlighted things that a lawyer will have to tell you if you don't know how to read a contract. We can just hire us if you're in Sydney, of course, or if you want a buyer's agent in another state that will go through something similar to what we go through, there's a handful of them, not many, and I can introduce you to them. So that's what we do at this point of time. But there's a bit more legal work that comes up as we get closer to either going to auction or making an offer.
Yeah, and I think obviously, and you're not even looking at a building and pest here yet. Are you at this point?
We're not quite there, but we would have booked it by this stage.
Yes, you're getting quite serious right now, right? Because you're not trying to waste the lawyer's time or solicitor's time until you've actually got a property you're really genuinely considering. You've figured out, you've seen thousands of them, so you sort of know whether there's any major things to be concerned about or things they want to investigate, and so you're doing a bit of the work for them, to be honest. But is it strata here? Because a lot of people are moving into strata, whether they're investors or owner-occupiers. Do you feel like this is where due diligence really needs to get really detailed for people buying into strata buildings?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And in fact, honestly, I think if someone's buying strata and they're doing it unassisted, and I honestly tell you, most buyers agents don't do what we do, as you've already alluded to. But then strata is a whole nother
Yeah.
level. You know, we've had to invest a lot of time and energy learning about strata and really getting a very robust due diligence process around strata. And we've got to understand the different types of strata complex. You know, it could be a large multi-strata complex, right, you know, with a massive community association and shared resources and, you know, some of them have got like 17 different strata plans within one complex. They're huge, right? Or it could come down to, is it part of a 2-lot strata? Like there's only 2. And then each ends of the spectrum and everything in between have their issues that you need to be checking through, right? And we also want to be looking, so we want to order a strata report, and it takes a while to get one. Sometimes you don't have the time to order one, right? So the agents generally have got one done. And so when we look at a strata report, we've got to be thinking, okay, what information is not in this? So we've got a bit of a lens or a pro forma, if you like, that we look at strata reports. And sometimes we do outsource advice on that strata report as well. We've got an additional advisor that will go through. They've got a legal and accounting background. So if we're at all concerned that there's not enough information in there, there's big gaps and we're not able to make head nor tail of it, then we will go further, because particularly in strata, I mean, I guess with all due diligence, I look at it as, you know, when you're a kid and you've got these little jigsaw puzzles in your little frame and you've got a pile of pieces on the side, and where due diligence process is really about making that jigsaw puzzle. But with strata, you'll find a lot of those pieces are missing. Huge amount of them. And you're like, okay, I've got to make an assessment as to what was on that piece of the puzzle. You know, what information is missing that can I be confident that I can take a risk on not knowing that in advance, or is that really problematic? And I'll give you an example. You'll often see a strata report with like a reference to various repairs or things that need to be done, and then there's referred to in the minutes of a meeting, and then you'll find no evidence of costings or quotes or nothing, and you think, okay, it's been referred to. What happened? And so if it's water, particularly because there's a lot of water issues in strata, and you go, well, that issue is continuing to get worse while this vacuum of information is going on. So you've got to be thinking, okay, what's the scope of it? What's potential, what could it cost? How much money have they got in the capital works fund? Is there potential for special levies? So there's a whole lot of things that you can come up with in terms of risk around strata that is really not, it's not literal. You know, people will go, oh, there's no mention in strata report about special levies. And I'm like, yeah, but there's also no mention about all these other things, which make me think that if these things get investigated and if they become worse and if they get quotes, you're going to be paying special levies. You know, but that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. So there's a lot to be done there. And also you've got to check the bylaws, you've got to check whether any of those particularly relate to the property that you're buying. You've also got to be looking around, how new it is and whether or not you've got potential defects issues. So there's so many issues. And then you've got to be looking at the management of it, how they run it, how harmonious it is, whether that's a toxic environment. Have they got a good capital works fund or sinking fund balance? You know what I mean? So there's a hell of a lot of stuff that we go into. I'm on a personal mission to help more people make better property decisions. Most people don't realise that they can cost themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars over the medium to long term when they make property decisions without all of the information that they need. And what I do is help people with tricky real estate problems, which often masquerade as simple questions like, should I sell my investment property because the interest repayments are hurting? Or should I buy before I sell? Or the other way around. You can connect with me and access all of the tools that I've created to help you make better property decisions at veronicamorgan.com.au. And there you will find resources for first home buyers, details about my buyer's agent mentoring program. You can connect with my Sydney-based property management and buyer's agency teams, Australia-wide vendor advocacy, or ask me for an introduction to the small group of buyer's agents that I would personally recommend across the country. That's veronicamorgan.com.au.
If you're looking to buy your first home, thinking of upgrading to a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, we would love to carefully guide you through this journey and, importantly, get the finance right. Reach out via my website, alcove.com.au. So when you go through these because nothing's perfect, right? So you can't, if you're looking for the perfect property, the perfect
You won't
strata,
buy.
yeah, exactly. You'll never buy. So, I mean, I guess when you're going through this, you're just looking at the risk of certain points that are maybe concerns, and maybe you have to go in blind a little bit on this for this one, but you got to cross your fingers a little bit. But some are just way more concerning because it could be, hey, there's no money in the kitty, there's some major works planned. You know, it looks like the building's a few arguments going on. Looks like that might not even get, you know what I mean? So some buildings you just know that are just at no deals because you're really taking a huge risk, and you're probably better off just to keep looking. But I mean, some though, you have to probably still just have a bit of a leap of faith, I imagine, in this space where, I mean, it's not perfect. You wish you could have more information, but it looks okay, but you just never really know because you haven't been able to find anything super negative.
Well, that's where some buildings are more risky than others. And
Yeah.
that's where, even with some smaller buildings, we've actually had building and pest inspections on the building. Like, they can't get it in every apartment or whatever, but, you know, sometimes there's some additional information that is required just to sort of allay our fears. And it is about assessing that risk. So as I said, you know, my metaphor there about the jigsaw puzzle, if you've got two pieces missing, it's not going to be as diabolical as if you got 8 pieces missing, you know. So we can't answer this, or this. I really wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. But look, then we might sort of theoreticize and say, look, you know, if they had to raise $500,000, for example, to do this thing that they've mentioned but they haven't really done anything about, well, how many lots are in it? What's the lot unit entitlement of this particular lot? What's your potential exposure if they had to raise a special levy of that magnitude? What is it if it's $1 million? You know, and so just getting it in context like that sometimes is the conversation we have to have with a client. But also then we go back to, okay, what's the opportunity here? Are we able to buy this property at a greatly reduced amount because of this uncertainty right now? And are you able to weather that period of time? And, you know, and in all things being equal, does that stack up? And there's been times, like, for example, I helped one client buy a property. It's a cracker apartment. I loved this apartment. It's only a building of 6, and it was about 6-7 years old. And you know, the builder had gone bust, and they did have they had costed water issues. There were some issues there that were uncosted, but they really costed out the lion's share of it, and they'd worked out what the special levies were going to be. And it was a first home buyer sort of price bracket in Sydney. But first home buyers couldn't possibly buy it because they needed to have at least another $80,000 to $100,000, you know, available for special levies. So they'd issued the agent said they issued something like 26 contracts to people who just, once they found that out, couldn't buy it. Well, my client was downsizing, had, you know, a fair chunk of cash, was able to put money aside. We did a full evaluation on the building, and we bought her apartment for just over $1 million. And it wasn't even 18 months later, the one downstairs from her, identical. There's only 3 that were identical, right? Identical, but they'd sorted this stuff out, and it sold for 1.5. Now, the market had grown in that time, but not that much. You know, so I'd worked it out that when she purchased it, that really it probably was worth around 125, and she got it for, I think it was $1,020,000. So that was a bit of a no-brainer in her circumstances. We knew as much. We probably had 2 bits of the puzzle missing. We didn't know the complete costing, but we had a fair idea. We'd factored in a buffer, and like, for her, it was a fantastic outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's this is a key stage. I'd say that most people just go in blind and, you know, do very little due diligence around here. So if you are buying in strata, I think as I'm sort of learning more and more over the years, I realized this is a gap that a lot of people are missing. And you know, I've had clients bought into, you know, what looked on the outskirts or on the outside, looked an amazing apartment, and they've got in, they've had water issues, they've had fights with owners, and they've had to sell years down the line. I've had some dreadful stories where people will never buy strata again because they've, you know, they've issues they've had to try to get things fixed, and you know, people not wanting to pay, and, you know, all sorts, and it's so stressful. Massive defects for clients, and the list goes on. And so, and more and more people are not just buying them for investments, but are buying them for homes. And so the issues are even greater when you're living in them. So, yeah, definitely don't miss that step. So then you've got, stratas looks all fine. The legals all look fine. Is it now really a case of going, well, what are we willing to pay for this, right? What's the price? I mean, have you even really tested the market here with the agent as well? Like, because sometimes if you're thinking that what are you doing to check whether the vendors, for example, if it's an off market, they might be wanting way more than you're even willing to pay. So you're so invested, you put sunk cost into this, but the reality is, you're thinking 1.2, the owner's thinking 1.45. Like, that gap's so big, you're never going to bridge it. So you could have just saved yourself a lot of time. How do you approach that?
And also there's more work to do because we haven't even tackled yet, which we will obviously, but the building and pests, and also, if it's an investment, you want to be looking at property management side of things. But with the pricing research, we're sort of doing this simultaneously often with two hands. We've got Simone doing our due diligence, and if it's Donna or it's Rachel or whoever's doing the actual buying side, they'll be doing the pricing research. And we've got a very rigorous process. I think I've talked about that a number of times on the podcast, how we go through that. We look at recent comparable sales. We're looking, and sometimes it's really quite difficult. We've got to go back further in time, or we have to look a bit further afield because trying to find, really relevant sales. We index prices to adjust for market movements. We're comparing things like floor plans and level of finish, and there's a whole number of things that we look at comparing these properties against the one we're looking at buying. We are obviously having conversations with the agent. Now, with some agents, we can have really frank conversations. With some agents, we're dealing with the dialogue, so we've got to know what we're dealing with. And obviously, you can't just add 10% to whatever the agent is quoting, because that is a really, really, really flawed way of trying to work out what you should pay for a property. So what we are doing is trying to then gauge, where is the owner versus where are we? If it's an auction campaign, we're going to be thinking all the way. We're thinking offer strategy and auction strategy. We're thinking, is this one that we need to be buying prior to try to buy prior? Is there an opportunity to do that or not? Or is this one that we really should go to auction on? If it's an off-market property, is it one of those ones that's overpriced with an uncommitted, vendor, unmotivated vendor, which they often are? In which case, do we just sit back and then we just cool our jets and we wait until that property comes on the market properly, which we have done. And, many times we've saved a significant amount of money by doing that. Not that we ever would have paid the overinflated expectation, but we could see that really we need to wait. Other times we can see that there is a real opportunity because this owner actually is realistic and we want to pounce because we want to take advantage of the fact we're not competing for the property. So it's assessing each property on its own merits, each agent in terms of how they work with their owner, how honest they are with us, the quality of intel, if you like, and also how easy they are going to be to negotiate with. And when I say easy, I don't necessarily mean anyone's a pushover. It's more just, will they work with us? Can we have a professional negotiation around this? Or do we have to play games? Do we have to then, go in blind and do all that palaver? So we are very clear on what the parameters are around that before we put together our offer strategy. But the price research is really key. And we also need to have a really a good discussion with our client. We've got a framework, how we help them set their limit so that they can really determine what their walkaway price is. We know what they'd love to buy it for, and our job is to try to get it for as little as possible. But we also need to have our client really understanding what are they prepared to pay for it if they have to under competitive circumstances as well. And having that conversation early on is really important.
Do you come up with like a certain price, that this apartment's worth $1 million, or do you say it's worth $950,000 to $1,050,000? And I think 1.1 really feels like it's overpaying. Do you sort of do it in a bit of a range? It's all subjective and different properties on the market, and it's so hard to come up with an exact number. But does it give you I guess a bit more of a better conversation if you do that, rather than it's worth a set number and then you're just so anchored to that number, when the reality is markets are always a bit more fluid.
Yeah, look, value is have to give you a fixed number, but we don't. So we give a range, and we try and get that range as tight as possible. And it's anchored or framed, if you like, bookended is probably a better word, by recent sales, to say, look, really and truly. And in fact, our conversation with price around, with the client is around, okay, if you're going to push yourself for this over what we can see, give you evidence that it's, worth, inverted commas, that's okay, but only if we think it's a real A-grade asset, only if it's really uniquely meets your criteria. And you can see from this price research how hard it's going to be to get another one that really fits your individual needs. And sometimes that's the case, but it's actually not an absolute A-grade property. It's just it really does suit them. And in fact, in those situations, often the client would be prepared to pay more. And we're like, you don't need to. Just keep that in your pocket, So we do have a lot of conversations with clients around that. So it's really about how good the property is, the actual competitive situation right at that time, and obviously how uniquely it suits their needs. And then what does the data say, it really should be worth as well.
Yeah, I mean, what it means it's worth to someone buying is absolutely different, right? I mean, people are going through different life stages and have different needs, and it could just be that it's really on a street close to their friends and their local kindy and the school, and they really value just walking there for the next 5-10 years, and it might not really impact the price that much, but it just gives them. And so I think it's having that deep emotional sort of conversation, and whether it doesn't, and some clients be like, well, I don't really care that much. Well, then you go, okay, that's cool. Then let's just make this a much more numbers game rather than, just getting a property to avoid the emotional pain of buying now. And I think that in itself, I believe just these conversations is what you're worth paying a buyer's agent for, let alone all the other things.
As long as they're having these conversations with you, because, we were at an auction the other day and I see this all the time where the buyer's agent turns around and starts pressuring their client in the middle of the auction. That should never happen. Should never happen.
Absolutely. So the good buyer's agent is absolutely that sounding board, particularly maybe when there's 2 or 3 properties that they're looking at, and being able to sort of debate which one to go for, which one better suits their life. And, and particularly trying to get both parties on board the same property, because naturally they all self-sabotage each other and then they pick different properties, and it's a bit of an emotional time.
We very rarely have that many to choose from.
That's true.
It's generally one at a time.
Yeah. I mean, there is times when the market's like really good, right? They're probably later in the autumn campaign, maybe in the height of
maybe
spring,
in spring.
when there's but often you're right, it's chasing one rabbit, and I think it's I think that's kind of a bit of a danger in itself sometimes.
Well, yeah.
Because you there's so little choice that if this doesn't pay off, you've just wasted 3-4 weeks waiting for that auction. And I think that's just one of the challenges of buying. So you've got this price conversation there, like you said, around the auction. We could do a whole episode on that, around setting price limits and making sure that you've tested that. I think you use different terminology, but I was sort of always said, it's that you're never going to be 100% happy with the price, because you always want to bargain. Naturally, you want it to be whatever, it's $1 less than what you ever paid. That's just naturally human psychology. You probably think that maybe there was more money on the table. You could have got it cheaper if you did this, but often you're not happy with price, and most of the time on great assets. But what you want to be happy with is the property you purchase, right? And I think it's how unhappy are you willing to be with the price, and it's leaning into that, right? And at what point do you sort of say, oh God, I'm really regretting that decision by not buying it? And when do you go, oh, look, I just think we would have stretched this too far, and B, I just feel like it just wasn't worth that, and I'm not going to have no regrets. I think it's that number, isn't it, that sometimes people have to push to.
We take clients, we sort of try to talk about the next morning.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
You paid this. How do you feel?
How do you feel? That's right.
Somebody else paid that. How do you feel? And sometimes the clients, they sort of go, where do you stop? And I'm like, you'll know where you stop, because you'll get to a point and go, oh my God, no way, I'm not paying that. Right, now let's work back again. So we push up, we push back. We want to have these conversations when it's simulating the pressure of an offer situation or auction, not actually when you're under the pressure of auction, because clients often will turn around and they want you to increase the bids during the auction. That's why I want to say to them, we've already done this. You've already pushed yourself. I really don't want, that's when you stop, But it's something that we've refined over the years, and I think we do a very good job of it, to be quite honest. And it is really important to have these conversations before you get to that point. And it's even important to have it before you start negotiating, let alone go to auction.
Well, the reality is, the thing that's affecting there is the social proof of that, and the excitement of the auction and all the emotional things that are there, right? And it's moved away from the fundamentals to an emotional situation. And the reality is, good assets are most likely going to rock up, and there's going to be other bidders there. And so, you should be really going through that, knowing that it's actually a good thing. But at some point, people aren't just buying the emotion of the day. And often properties do go way past the intrinsic value and what they should be selling for. And I think, how do you sort of manage that? Is it then leaning back to that conversation you had prior to the day? And is that a difficult conversation sometimes, where they regret it and the next day, even though they've stress tested their number?
Our motto is buy without regrets. And we very rarely get a client regret either paying it or not paying it, right?
Look, and I mean, we could talk about that negotiation all day, to be honest, but there's a few other steps of the due diligence that we haven't covered, right? So building a pest, huge one, right? Like,
yep.
I mean, how people buy property without doing a building pest, astounds me, but people do it every day. I mean, do you have one or two or three or five just builders locally, and how do you pick a good person to inspect the property?
We've got a handful of building inspectors that we rely on. How do you pick a good one? Well, you want someone who's prepared to meet you at the end of the inspection, for starters, and we'll give you a quick rundown of the major issues with a property. Obviously, what you don't want is you really don't want to be relying on the one that the agent's got. Every now and then we will, but that's because we know the actual inspector. And we're happy to, and then we can pick up the phone and talk to the inspector and say, look, can you give us a bit of a lowdown, after we're paid for it, of course. But, and some agents will give a free one out, and you just got to be super careful, because honestly, some of those, I've had, building inspections from the same franchise, side by side, the one that we got versus the one that the agent got. Same franchise, one of them doesn't talk about the fact you've got rotting bathroom floors, there's $20,000 worth work needed to be done, says couldn't get up into the roof and work out whether there's any termite ever had any termite damage. It's like, well, yes, there has been, and here's the photo of it. They're just really cursory and at best. And in fact, I've taken some of these agents to task and said that actually it's marketing material, it's false and misleading.
Yeah.
But they go, no, it's not, it's building inspection as a disclaimer. It's like, no, it's so I think you've got to be very careful. And that's why I want an inspector who will climb in the roof. I mean, obviously some houses you can't get in there, but like at the end of the day, if there's a manhole, get up there. If there's a manhole on the floor, get under the floor. I want to know as much as I can about that property. And I want to know that this person isn't just sort of done a real flicker, walked through with their stick, tapping the walls, and then walked out, dictated a report and bang. It hasn't actually been anywhere, looked at anything. So that's really important. And you could go further. You can get electrical reports, plumbing reports, pool reports. And look, you don't need to do that on every single property, but there are times when there's, we think, we need to do a little bit more work on here, or even an arborist report sometimes, So there's other things that you might want to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, geotechnical sort of reports up my way are a big part of it, and making sure that the block's pretty nice and secure.
Yes.
You've done your building and pests now. You've got a pretty good idea of price. Client happy go. We've got a good crack on this. Have you sense checked that with the agent, by the way, on the price? Have you sort of are you keeping your cards up your sleeve? Are you keeping your gunpowder? Like, are you sometimes just testing that to go, look, because at some point you might say, well, just speaking to the agent, this is just not going to happen, right? Like, we've got a 5% chance of this coming off. Do we really want to be pursuing this, or should we put our energy somewhere else? Do you have those conversations?
Look, there's some properties that we call them Stephen Bradbury moments. It's like, oh, you know what? This is definitely an outlier. You've definitely only got a small chance, but it is a chance. And so therefore we can't totally ignore it. So we do have to go through all this work, We've got, look, we haven't even finished the due diligence. We haven't even got to 109 steps. If I go through, if a client wants to renovate, we're going to have to assess the renovation potential. So do we need to get an architect?
Yeah.
Do we need to, are there any trees in the way? What are the building cost estimates? What is it likely they're going to get approved what they want? If it's strata, has anyone else in the building done what they want to do? What's the process? There's a whole bunch of things that we need to go through there. What are the impediments to doing it? And do they have a realistic cost expectation as well? Because a lot of people think that, they overestimate, how easy it's going to be and underestimate what it's going to cost. So we have to make sure that they're going in with their eyes wide open on that. If they're an investor, we want to make sure that we're checking and the property is leased, currently tenanted. We've got more due diligence to do on the tenant and the managing agent as well, to make sure that it's actually not in arrears and they're looking after the place properly and they've got all the proper ingoing reports, et cetera, et cetera. We want to make sure that if it isn't tenanted and the client's going for it, we want to have a realistic rental appraisal, because sales agents will inflate I'm astounded how many people take the sales agent's estimated rental at face value. That just cracks me up. And what I do there is, obviously I've got a property management business now, and Kate will do an appraisal on that. But before that, we used to get an independent appraisal, never rely on that. And then we've got to do all the other local due diligence. We've got to check all the, are there DAs that either potentially could be submitted or have been submitted or have been approved? What sort of things can we uncover from council in terms of, there could be flood issues. There could be, if you're buying in a bushfire zone, you need to be looking at that sort of stuff. What about greenfield infrastructure, brownfield infrastructure? There's been lots of due diligence we've had to do in recent years with tunnelling in Sydney. Huge amount around tunnelling, much more now around flood zones. So all of these things are absolutely imperative that we do check beforehand, before we go forward, and even before we make an offer. We want to know this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's particularly when you want to do renovations there. If you don't, what are your neighbours doing? Looking over the fence, checking the council reports. I got a client trying to buy something in the inner west right now, and it's all those questions are coming up, right? And we've got to do a lot of, and speaking to town planners and architects, and it's a lot of work, particularly when you're busy, and having those contacts and searching and the fear of making a mistake there. And I think this is another part where buyer's agents that can help you think that through, and there's a process there. They can do a lot more checks and cross the I's and dot the T's for you. But I do think
knowing what to ask.
What's that?
It's knowing what to ask, knowing who to ask and what to ask.
Yeah, and I'd just be careful here, even when you are working with buyer's agents, not saying just Veronica, but you've always got to keep your eye on the ball, I'd say, and make sure that you're not just completely outsourcing things, because you can't go back down 6 months later and say, oh, well, you didn't check that or you didn't check this. You've sort of got to go with this process and check it and make sure that it's, because I have seen mistakes over the years that buyer's agents have missed things, particularly around this stage. Clients have gone in and they could have just done some very easy checks in the area to realise that, hang on a sec, the neighbour's doing X, Y, Z, and there's something getting built just down the road. And, the buyer's agent has sort of missed this step. And so, definitely do, spend a lot of time here and trying to understand as much as you can, because these things can have huge impacts on your prices of what you can and can't do to a block. We should probably wrap it up. Negotiation prep is probably what we spoke about before. Is there anything else to really add in here?
Well, after you sort of go unconditional, you exchange contracts on a property, depending on which state you're in, you've got the settlement period. So in that period, you've got to do a bunch of stuff. Your lawyer will run a lot of checks and a lot of requisitions. But you need to know, do you need to insure? When do you need to insure the property? Because that's different according to where you're buying, what state. Look into title insurance, whether you should be doing that. Book yourself a pre-settlement inspection. Create yourself a checklist. What are you going to be checking at that pre-settlement inspection? When you be checking things work, you've got to remember that appliances, for example, that they are at the condition as to when you went unconditional. So if you want to be making sure that those appliances work, you need to be checked before you actually signed a contract. If the property's tenanted, you want to make sure that you're getting all the ongoing inspection reports and all that sort of stuff. Is a property manager present? So there's a bunch of stuff that you want to be doing at the pre-settlement inspection to make sure, because I'm astounded the amount of people just get the keys and they didn't check it, So, and check in with your lawyer before you actually, before they send it all off to PEXA to settle. But I just finish it on a Dumbo. How's that? The Dumbo is our licensing regime, our buyer's agent licensing regime. Across the country, a buyer's agent has to do the same course that a property manager or a sales agent does in order to get licensed to operate as a buyer's agent. And that course was not designed for buyer's agency, and all that stuff that I've just taken you through there, I would say not even 10% of that is covered in the licensing course. They don't have a module on due diligence, right? They talk about a property appraisal from a selling agent's point of view, right? And they will talk about vendor disclosure, so prescribed documents in the sense that, you have to know what's in a contract, but they don't teach you what information is in those prescribed documents. They don't teach you how to read those prescribed documents, and they don't even teach you really why you'd want to read them. So you can come out fully newly minted as a buyer's agent, fully qualified, have your license, set up business, but it's not even occurred to you that this stuff needs to be done because it hasn't even been mentioned. And if you have not shadowed somebody or been mentored by somebody, worked for somebody who's experienced and actually does know how to do this stuff, you won't even realize that it should be done. And you'll end up with one of those clients that says to you one day, "Why didn't you tell me that?" And that's the worst. I think what's the worst thing a buyer's agent could ever hear from a client. Why didn't you tell me that? Right. And that's the Dumbo, our licensing regime that allows that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately the case in lots of the elements of the property market. Is the regulation and what's the minimum standards is not enough. But when in the buyer's agency world, I think it's huge assets people are helping people buy and spend, and huge impacts on their financial futures, and it's just not high enough. So that's a great Dumbo. Great episode too. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Look forward to chatting to you all soon.
If you have a question that you'd like us to answer in an upcoming Q&A episode, you can send us a voicemail or written question via the website, theelephantintheroom.com.au, or you can email us directly at questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au. If you like what you're hearing, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars would be great. I know that sounds a bit cringy, but we have it on good authority that every review helps make it easier for other people to find out about us and hear what our amazing guests have to say.